Hello, welcome to another SonicLAB. Today we're looking at the much anticipated Dave Smith Instruments Prophet REV 2. It's been a while coming because essentially Dave Smith Instruments have just announced the REV 2 desktop and they hadn't been sending out any review units, and I guess they wanted to coincide with that, give it a little bit of an extra push. But we finally got ours. This is the 16 voice version because as standard it comes as 16, but you can buy an 8 voice, which is slightly cheaper, but you can then stick an 8 voice card in it to expand it up to 16 voices. According to Dave Smith, the REV 2 is a kind of upgrade to the Prophet 08, which for a lot of people has been a kind of stalwart polysynth. Has been around for almost 10 years, so it's quite a sort of long in the tooth in that respect. You can still buy that, but essentially the REV 2 provides some additional functions as well. It's got very much the similar architecture. You can in fact bring Prophet 08 patches into the REV 2, but the REV 2 does have more features. Let's just see what those features are. First of all, we've got the effects section here, which are digital effects, and that is per synth engine because of course we can split and layer the keyboard, creating two effectively independent synth engines. There's also the addition of a 64-note polyphonic sequencer, which can be switched into a gated mode, which gives us up to 4 lanes of modulation routing, so you can route that all over the place and have it do some quite fancy stuff. Speaking of modulation routings, the mod matrix has been updated to twice the size. So in the Prophet 08 it was 4 slots, in the REV 2 it's 8 slots. We've got a 61 key keybed, which actually feels pretty nice. It's got aftertouch and velocity, is a perfectly fine feeling keybed. So just a note on the architecture, as I say, pretty much the same as the Prophet 08. We've got 2 DCO oscillators per voice. Oscillator 1 has a sub-oscillator. We've got 3 envelopes, filter envelope, amplitude envelope and auxiliary envelope. We've got analog VCA and the classic Curtis filter, which again is an analog filter just in 2 or 4 pole low pass modes. At this end we've got your standard pitch and mod wheels, which feel fine. And in terms of build quality, the whole thing does actually feel pretty good. And just to familiarise yourself maybe with the architecture as well, in addition to all of that, we've got 4 low frequency oscillators. Each of those is per voice. So that's on a 16 voice REV 2, that is 64 LFOs. All can be independently running, or indeed you can, as I say, you can have them in key sync mode, so they'll all trigger from the same note, or sync to the internal tempo. Get some lovely sounds out of this instrument, and to my ears, and I've heard it said, there's something a little more tonally appealing about the REV 2 than there is the Prophet 08. I'm not sure why that would be. This sound, for instance, I'm using the 3rd envelope to blend between the 2 oscillators to provide that 5th kind of note to come in, to add that richness. Plus the effects, obviously, and all those other things. And it just, while I've been playing with it, it really does feel quite, complete as an instrument. And I have found in the past with some Dave Smith stuff that I didn't connect with it quite so well, but I haven't had a problem with the REV 2 at all. So let's get on to some of perhaps the nuts and bolts of it, take a look at the waveforms, that kind of thing. Okay, to start with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press global, and I page through to page 25, and I can bring up an init program, which means now I've just got a raw sawtooth wave. So if we look at that on the screen, nice shape, a little bit curvy at the top, but all pretty much as you would hope. If we look at the actual oscillators themselves, we've got the sawtooth. Basically each of the oscillators tune in the same way that you tune other Dave Smith instruments. So starting at C0 goes right up to C10 in semitone increments. Then we've obviously got the fine tune as well. So I think this init patch is at C2, where we can modulate the shape. It's essentially like pulse width modulation for each of the waveforms. So if we come up here and look at what happens when we pass through the shape mod, we get it to sort of double saw and then back out the other end. It's an inverted sawtooth. Saw through triangle, and again we've got this intriguing kind of like saw and triangle combination, and it gives it quite an interesting shape, particularly if we wanted to modulate that. Get this, it's like pulse width modulation, but it's different, which in my books is great. So let's go to triangle now, and right over far left on the shape mod, get a nicely shaped triangle passing through. We get a very unusual, if I turn it down a little bit, be able to see the peaks. Very unusual kind of shape. If we go right down to the bottom end, the only thing I would say is, you know, perhaps if this was a mono synth, I might criticise the fact that there doesn't seem to be that kind of earth-shaking bottom end that a triangle would ordinarily provide. I mean, it's there, I mean, and you could enhance it in EQ or whatever, but perhaps in a polysynth that's not quite so important. But there's plenty of thump there, but as we get a bit further down, it sort of bass end drops away a little bit. And of course, good old pulse width modulation, and we go from not quite through zero, through the pulse width. And obviously we can modulate that with LFOs, envelopes, all kinds of stuff. So we can get some very nice sounding pulse width modulation. Another nice little thing, if I bring in the second of these 4 LFOs, remember we've got 4 per voice, which is pretty awesome. And I dial in, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but I'll dial that into oscillator frequency. As you can see here, it's set to a square wave. I've got it preset. So now I've got it's dialing to an octave, and that's something that's pretty handy because basically what this does, the amount is basically unipolar, which means that obviously a lot of synths are bipolar, which means that it goes above and below the center point. But because it's unipolar, it means we can dial in a specific pitch amount, which means that we can just create these lovely pads. So if I just stick a bit of reverb on it and have another go. Well, I say a bit of reverb, I mean a lot of reverb, so, you know, can't help myself. So essentially, you know, the LFOs, the 4 LFOs are really handy. The only thing that I would say is that they are free running, essentially. I mean, you can key sync them so that they will all trigger at the same time, but what... Take the reverb off. They cascade, so it's not possible to set the LFO to be completely fixed for all voices. They are sort of independent. You can get around this a little bit by hitting clock sync and key sync, which means that obviously on down it will start the cycle, but that doesn't stop if you're playing notes at a tempo, and you still would get these kind of cascading LFO patterns. That, and there's no dedicated sort of fade in or delay, though it is actually quite easy to set up. We can use the auxiliary envelope to dial in. It's like a sort of separate little mod matrix, a 1-slot mod matrix. So for instance here I've got it set to LFO amount, I've got a bit of delay and a bit of attack on it, and now, so when I play a note, the strength of LFO 1 in this case comes in. And I have created that delay. So it's sort of, this is one of those things about those synths, you sort of go, oh, does it do that? And then you can figure out all these ways. The routing is actually really complex, and the stuff that you can do is very impressive in terms of, it's one of those synths that when you go, oh, if only I could, and then you go, oh, I've got an LFO left, or I've got a modulation source left, or I've got perhaps an auxiliary envelope that I'm not using yet. There is actually quite a lot of modulation potential here. So let's take a look at the connections. We've got headphone out on 1/4" jack. There's no separate volume control for that. 2 sets of stereo balanced outputs. The mix output, or this can be layer A and then another one for layer B. So you can have essentially 2 sets of stereo outputs. pedal CV in, sustain pedal input, and sequencer or audio trigger for the envelopes in here. This is well, and then we've got MIDI through, out, in, or in, out, through, and finally USB, which is class compliant for MIDI only. Finally, at the end there, IEC multi-voltage connection and a power switch. Listening to the sound of the filter now. A sort of classic brassy low pass mode. This is a Curtis filter, which is kind of an analog filter on a chip, 2 and 4 pole mode, no other multi-mode, so just low pass only, and it's got a nice smudgy quality to it, that real sort of classic brass. There is no way of kind of gain staging into the filter, no additional drive, so it's pretty much a sort of standard filter with not many more adornments. We'll listen to 2 pole. Bit skinnier, and when we bring the resonance up, obviously no resonance. Back in 4 pole I suppose you should hear the resonance too, so here's about 50%. Yes, it's got those nice, if I bring it a bit more, sing-song harmonics. I know that's another one of my catchphrases, so you can take a drink if you're playing the drinking game here. We've also got the ability to audio rate mod, and audio rate mod is taken from oscillator 1. Here I've got it hard over, so we're only listening to oscillator 2, but if I get a sound with a bit of resonance in, and we bring the audio rate mod in, got some really nice little sweet spots in there, and of course it is actually possible to disable the pitch of either or both oscillators so that you could have a sort of fixed mod rate in there as well. As I said, it would have been kind of nice to have another couple of modes and perhaps a bit of drive, but I think that's probably not what the Curtis filter is particularly well known for. Another thing worth mentioning is we've got a full ADSR envelope here, plus a delay setting which kind of delays the onset of the envelope. Should quickly point out that it's possible to play the filter as well. So if I take the oscillator out, because you can switch both oscillators off, so we've got no oscillators coming in, then I come back here and I set my key amount. The key amount is actually goes from 0 to 200%, but it doesn't display in percentages. So to get 100%, you have to kind of dial in 64, let's get full resonant, and then we can just go. I could get a bit of maybe, bring a bit of audio rate mod in there. So you can get some really nice bell tones as well using the audio rate mod, as well as many other tones too. So we're going to take a look at the effects now, and I'm just going to run a sequence here, just because I'm using the polyphonic sequence here. And I'm starting with just a straight delay. We can switch the effects off, delay mono, and this is clock sync, so we can change the clock. Then we've got a stereo delay. Generally speaking, this is the mix control. This selects the algorithm, and then these two select 2 different parameters. In the delay, it's the sync time or the delay time, and the feedback. We'll go to bucket brigade delay. A bit more lo-fi. Then we've got a nice chorus. Like a talking phaser, which is very pleasant. 3 different kinds of phaser. Nice wide flanger, 2 different sorts of those. And the reverb, I'll switch this off for the reverb. Reverb feels a bit more kind of just a bit lusher to me than it was on the OB6 desktop, though I haven't got that here, so I can't tell you exactly. So if we just play a few sounds, again we got mix, reverb time and reverb tone. So just the reverb. We bring the tone down. Sounds like it's doing more than just a filter on it. It feels like there's some sort of tilt EQ and maybe a bit more going on in the kind of richness of the reverb. But you can get, if we take the mix right up and the tone down, I mean, it's not the best reverb I ever heard, but it matches quite nicely with the character of the sound, and it gives us a bit of extra. And let's not forget, we've got 2 effects in this system, which allows us to have an effect per layer or split, depending on how we've got it. And while we're at it, we can also modulate these 2 parameters. So if I come down to LFO3 here and maybe route this, it's already routed here, to effect parameter 2, that means I can now modulate using this LFO that effects parameter. So if I dial that in, which is in the reverb damping, perhaps it's not something you'd use every day, but it's nice to have those possibilities. And of course you can modulate maybe delay times, get a little bit of extra wobble, all kinds of interesting stuff. And you can route those. These are accessible by the 8 slots modulation matrix or directly via the low frequency oscillators, you know, so you could route them via envelopes. So the effects, while they're certainly okay, and in fact better than okay really, they're not stunning. And you know, things like having to have different reverb algorithms, plates, gated, ambient, that sort of thing, you know, it would have been nice to maybe see a bit more of that. But there is also this distortion, which I'll show you now. I've got this nice rounded bass patch here. If we take a look at the effects, I've got, I should mention we've got ring mod as well. Which is actually pretty cool, but I was going to show you the distortion effect. So blend it, and it's quite a nice sort of analog distortion vibe. There's also a high pass filter, which is in fact resonant. So if I you can pick out those pretty tasty, massive kind of low harmonics with that. So that's kind of an extra filter that's quite handy. And finally, yeah, that's it. That's all the algorithms that you've got in the effects. So in that last patch, I was using the polyphonic sequencer, and the polyphonic sequencer is this section here, which also has another mode, gated, a bit more on that in a sec. And it's a step time sequencer with up to 64 steps, up to 6 notes per step. You can't have any more than that. And you have to basically, you go into record and you have to play, and it just jumps through the steps. If you want a rest or a tie, you press one of these buttons. There is no way of recording this in real time or overdubbing once you're playing, which is a bit of a shame really. I'd like to have seen that because it makes it a little bit more kind of interactive and intuitive to use. And that sort of brings into one other thing that I wanted to mention. If we look at the unison button, the unison button only works in mono unison, so we can have up to 15 notes stacked with the detune part of them, or 7 notes stacked if you're using the 8-note version, but you can't have polyphonic unison. So I couldn't say stack 2 voices or 4 oscillators per voice or that on and therefore. It only works in mono mode, which is just a thing that I should mention there. So in this patch I'm using the gated sequence, and what that does is gives you up to 4 lanes of routing. So I can route the destination of the sequencer to all of these particular destinations, and in this instance I've got a patch here which I'm just basically advancing through. I'm in key step mode, so what that was doing basically, in the lower half of the split, I've got this sequence running, which every time I press a key, it moves one of the oscillators, because this is set at a drone, oscillator 1, through a sequence of notes. And if we look at how that's working, basically the parameter, so if I go to mode, I'm in key step mode, then I think I'm using track 2 to the oscillator frequency, and then each step has a different note associated with it, because I'm actually modulating the oscillator 1 frequency. I can go into quarter tone steps. If I was modulating another frequency, it would just be another parameter, it would just be a value. But one thing that was missing a bit of a trick here is I would really like to be able to, rather than have to dial it in, which is what I have to do here, I want to be able to, say, press record, hit a note, hit another note, go through the steps. Just seems like a bit of a shortcut could have been done there, because, for instance, you know, I might have a pad where I'm playing through different layers, different pedal notes, and it creates these kind of inversions. I'll show you. I've got a patch here. Again, I'm in key step mode. And each press of the key I look here, destination, let me see where I'm going, destination, I'm using oscillate sequence 1, and I'm going through, I've just got 4 steps here, because on the 5th step I've got reset, so I've just got cycling through 4 notes. And then back round again. So there are all sorts of ways in which you can utilise the sequencer, and there's some fantastic patches in here which utilise very powerful amounts of modulation routings, all sorts of rhythmic drum stuff. You could be turning up, you know, noise to get some kind of rhythmic effect. There's all sorts of ways you can use it, and it is actually very powerful. So the REV2 also, as we've said, has the ability to split and layer. So it's really straightforward. Essentially, any patch that you've got, if you want to split it AB or stack it AB, edit layer B, and then effectively you just flip between the front panels of the 2 independent synths. It's also worth mentioning that with these two sets of outputs, you've got output A and output B for each layer, so you can take them separately too. And the way that this works is you get half the available voices per layer, whether that's split or layer mode. There's no dynamic allocation. The only thing I would say is sometimes if you wanted to use the 2 sequencers, you know, it's quite easy to get, you find if you're playing and you go, oh, you reach for something, you've suddenly messed up your the wrong layer, because you've got to do that. But that's not really something that is, you know, Dave Smith's problem, unless you had a dual manual thing. The other thing you can do is you can copy layers between each other by pressing and holding, and then you get a menu here, and it allows you to copy one layer to another, and then you can have slight variations, maybe pan them hard left and right. So you get a lot of flexibility in terms of how you route it. In terms of MIDI as well, you can address them on separate MIDI channels, so you get a bi-timbral operation. The USB is actually MIDI only, so you know there's no audio aspect to this, but that's common to all of the Dave Smith instruments, keyboards and synthesizers, as far as I can tell. So if you're going to be using this live, I mean, one of the advantages to the REV2 is obviously you've got the split and layer, so you could have multiple sounds, and obviously with the 2 outputs, we've got essentially 2 separate synthesizers that will double up, and that's something that's going to be quite appealing to you. It should be mentioned though, obviously you've probably seen this, there are no buttons here for quick access to programs, so if you're going to be doing that, you might want to use a MIDI controller or handle program changes elsewhere. It's program and bank, and there are 4 banks, I think, 512 programs of user presets and 512 presets. So that'll should give you plenty to be working with. While we're on the display, I want to just show you quickly the mod matrix. Obviously we've got 8 slots, plus mod wheel, plus pressure, plus breath, plus velocity, plus MIDI foot control, and it's pretty straightforward. We just select the source. Got lots and lots of different sources here, the amount and the destination, and it really is that simple to end up routing. In fact, there are shortcuts. If you press destination and say hit, I don't know, effects parameter 1, it will be the source. If you press and hold the source, I know we might go LFO1, so we can sort of shortcut quickly to get to those modulation destinations and matrix, and it's actually a very powerful part of the synthesizer. So in terms of competition, the polysynth market has been hotting up recently. We've obviously got the Behringer DeepMind 12, which has 12 voices as standard. Obviously you can get 6 voice versions, but it has more in terms of effects going on. There is a little bit more menu diving perhaps than there is on the Rev 2, and you don't get the split and the layer, obviously. There's also Roland System 8, which does gives you the split and layer, but obviously is purely digital, but you also get the kind of patch and bank button, so it might suit you a bit more live. And of course we've got Novation's Peak, which is again 8 voice, but it's got more oscillators, more routing potential, and a lot more audio rate mod and cross mod possibilities. But with the Dave Smith Rev 2, you know, you are paying a little bit more. I think it's 1,429 quid for the 8 voice version. There is an upgrade board which is $600. I'm not sure what that costs in pounds, and the 16 is about the 16 voice is about 1,920 quid, something like that. So you are paying a little bit of a kind of Dave Smith premium, but that's for a reason. He's been designing synthesizers for a long time, and what he's got here is a very coherent instrument. You know, the improvements over the Prophet 08 are not to be sniffed at, and definitely kind of add that extra stuff. The effects themselves, even though there's only 1 per layer and they're a little bit limited, they add an awful lot to the party. So if you're looking for a polysynth either for live or studio, the Rev 2 is definitely something worth checking out. It has a kind of coherency as an instrument. All those kind of years of experience that Dave Smith has, you know, they show in the way that you can just sort of reach for it and create some really complex sounds. As I said, I was always finding, oh, I've got another LFO, or I've got an envelope, or I've got another slot in the mod matrix, and that really does kind of make a big difference to the whole sort of way that you interact with the instrument. Anyway, that's it for this SonicLAB. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.